Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, Play the Opinion Potomac Watch Podcast. That is, Play the Opinion Potomac Watch Podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot here on Potomac Watch with Kim Strassel and Kate O'Dell. And let's talk about the politics of the border. Michael Johnson, the new Speaker of the House, led a delegation of some 60 Republican members down to Eagle Pass, Texas, this week to highlight the issue and the mess at the border. And let's listen to the Speaker.
Rather than incentivizing people to come, the president needs to deter people from entering the country. Rather than discussing amnesty with Mexico, as top Biden administration officials did within the last couple of weeks, this administration should reinstate the Remain in Mexico policy, as was said. Rather than expanding parole authority to an unprecedented scale, the president should obviously end catch and release and stop the abuse of our parole and asylum systems.
Or the solution is simply, I think, one sentence. No money can be used to process or release into the country any new migrants. To just say suspend it now, which the president can do. But if he won't do it, we should put that one sentence in must-pass legislation.
That was Jim Jordan, the Ohio congressman there in the second clip. Kim, this is obviously taking center stage in American politics now, border security, the warnings about the mess at the border that have been sounded now since the beginning of the Biden administration finally seem to be having political consequences for the administration. The failure to really do anything to stop migrants coming in is now a national issue with the mayors of big cities in New York and Chicago, Washington, D.C., and the governor of Massachusetts, mayor of Boston, all lamenting the fact that they have to spend scarce resources to handle migrants. It's become a much bigger issue, and even Democrats think they need to do something. And that's why the president and his administration, not the president himself, but his designees, and Senate Democrats are engaged with Senate Republicans to try to knock out some border security changes. In the same time, they're trying to pass this Ukraine supplemental aid bill. Is any of this making the likelihood of getting some reforms passed? Is it increasing the likelihood that they're passed, or is it going to make this more difficult to get done?
I think it's increasing the likelihood if Republicans don't screw it up. And that's the important caveat here. Look, right now, this is absolutely terrible politics for Joe Biden. If you look at the approval ratings, his handling of this is in the 30s, in some polls in the low 30s. As you say, Democrats know this, but it's just been in the past 2 months that it's become such a liability, in part because of increased attention on what seemed to be just pouring of people over the border. Maybe it's a little bit the lack of other news, the blue state complaints, which are now, again, keeping it in the news, and disarray within the Democratic Party. All of this has made Democrats more willing to play ball. And it's striking, Paul, just 2 months ago, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer was still saying, well, we'll give you money, but that's it. No policy changes, nothing. And of course, it's become bad enough that now the White House is in active negotiations and Senate Democrats are with Republicans. That has a likelihood of coming up with a solution. I truly believe that, especially as Republicans are saying this is tied to Ukrainian funding and the president wants that funding. So there's an added incentive. My concern, Paul, is what the Senate is likely to come up with, which would be a bipartisan deal, which would have some substantive reforms on asylum and parole, is increasingly not of a level of what House Republicans are insisting they need, which is the entirety of H.R. 2, which is a much bigger immigration bill and tougher immigration bill, dealing with a lot more issues than just some of these discrete policy questions. If that's the standard that they're going to stick to, that isn't likely to go through the Senate or be accepted by the White House. And they could end up being presented with a deal, tank it, and then nobody gets anything.
Right. The focus of the negotiations in the Senate have been on asylum policy, increasing the standard for being able to claim asylum from credible fear to something tougher, since credible fear seems to be a very low bar. Also, reducing the number of people who are allowed in through so-called humanitarian parole. That's been a essentially the way in which the administration has just let people come in and then flow into the country. Republicans want to put a cap on the number that are allowed to come in each year through humanitarian parole. And then there are a couple other reforms that the Republicans want in the Senate, including a reinstatement, if they can get it, of the Remain in Mexico policy. But some House members want more, and they want, as Kim said, Kate, they want H.R. 2 in its entirety. Now, H.R. 2 is really a much more expansive immigration bill and includes things like mandatory use of E-Verify, which would require employers to use a federal database that would check to see about the legal standard. E-Verify is not work all that well, and it would impose a new burden on business and probably couldn't pass the House on its own. But if this is the kind of demand that House Republicans make, probably have a hard time passing the Congress.
Right. I mean, to just at the risk of foot stomping Kim's point, even several months ago, Republicans were demanding changes to the asylum system and the incentives it creates for people to come to the country. And Democrats were saying, no, we won't negotiate on that. They've been forced by the politics to move off that position. Republicans should see that as a political victory, as that's a notable accomplishment. That's not nothing. And there is this developing attitude in the conference that if you don't fix everything all at once, it is not worth doing. And that is sort of odd because it's coming from the same corners of the party that have for years tarnished anything that was considered comprehensive immigration reform. So it is an odd political alliance there. But I do think also, just as a practical point, you have some people who are now wanting to use this as further leverage as part of the appropriations bill. And one thing we haven't mentioned yet is that the border deal is also supposed to help move through funding for Ukraine. And that has been on pause. And I think Republicans have been thinking, well, Ukraine can hang on until February when we iron out a good deal. And that may be true, but the Ukrainians are rationing ammunition, and that is not how you want to be fighting a war. And Republicans shouldn't underestimate how quickly the situation there could change, and that they will bear political blame for it if they allow aid to lapse while they keep moving the goalposts on an immigration deal. So I think that favors doing a deal now, even if it doesn't have everything you want. And finally, just a quick prudential point is that if you get some victories in this border Ukraine deal, you can leverage those to do more in the appropriations process. Victories tend to beget more victories, but failure and dysfunction tend to not. And I'm worried that's not exactly sinking in.
Well, and Republicans, if this all collapses, they would have opened the White House to the opportunity to say that Republicans gave up an opportunity, a chance to do something on the border. And it would also hurt the Republicans who want to go back and be able to say to the voters in November, we've actually accomplished something here with this Congress. You voted us in. Look what we've done. We promised more on border security. Here's what we've done. A, B, C, if they can get some things they can point to. Otherwise, they're going to go back and could be able to say, see, we will do something in 2024. But their candidates will be able to say, see, they didn't do anything. They don't want to do anything. They want to get the issue and run on this ad infinitum. That might work for Democrats. Kim, you get the last word.
The need for them to go back to the electorate showing some accomplishments is all the bigger and greater, given that they haven't really done anything because they have spent so much time this year fighting amongst themselves, given their very tiny majority that they gained in the midterms. We've had the speaker spectacle how many times now? The inability of them to get some of those spending bills across the line that they have promised. We'll see if they manage to do that in the coming weeks or month as these new deadlines approach. There still could be the possibility of a government shutdown if there are not agreements made and bills passed. So they need what they can take here. And this is just this big, plump, wonderful opportunity sitting there. But to do that, they're going to have to be realistic about what they can get, what will really help, and to keep their eye on the prize, which ought to be this coming year's election.
All right. Big challenges ahead then for the new Speaker of the House with his narrow majority and for Joe Biden, as he probably has to sit down and cajole and persuade a lot of Democrats to go along with something on border security they may not in the first instinct like. All right. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Kim. Thank you all for listening. We're here every day on Potomac Watch, and we hope you will be with us tomorrow as well. Thanks for listening.